I understand pragmatism is like basically if it works, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, this is the most obvious one that I can think of, but if you say like, is it true that God exists? And then you can ask like, does it help you? Is it like functional to believe that God exists? And I mean personally, I would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
So like from a pragmatic view, then you would say, yeah, that's true, or you would say it's true enough
Right.
because it works for you, and you're not gonna know what's true anyways.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I don't know if it's just a safety thing for you, but for me, it's like it provides us the opportunity not to always look for ultimate answers.
Mm.
Because, like, we go away from this is the truth, the only answer to this question, to does it help us through this situation? Does it push us to a solution? And is it rational? And I think that's the biggest thing is like, if it's rational in the situation, it's going to help us through it, then use it. And obviously, it may not be ultimately true, but it makes people problem solvers as opposed to static thinkers, if you know what I'm saying.
Why do you say that?
I was going to say that people who aren't thinking pragmatically in the face of a problem, you would be working off whatever dogma you learned in the last lesson you were in this area of problems. So let's say there's a medical emergency. You are No, let's not say there's a medical emergency. Medicine's pretty important. Let's say you have a math problem, and it's a multiplication problem, a small multiplication problem, and somebody's like, what's 4 times 10? There's the person who will multiply 4 times 10, but there's also the people who would divide that into smaller numbers. I'm not good at math, so I'm not going to give you exact numbers. And multiply those and then add the groups together, right? And I think that by thinking pragmatically, you're like, does both methods work? Did you arrive at the correct answer? Yes. And are the ways you're thinking rational? Yes. Therefore, you have 2 new problem solvers to one problem. Before, you would have just said, the only way to do this is multiplying the 4 by the 10. You're completely stifling somebody's brain, you know? And you're
Yeah,
saying, this is the way it is. And I think dogma is dangerous.
no doubt. Do you think it's important to, like, the example that I had before, do you think it's important to further prove the truth of certain claims beyond just their pragmatic value?
No, I really don't. I think you're really right in that. It's like, if it provides for you, because I also agree with you, I think it services us to believe that God is real. It may not be the same God, it may not be the same religion, but I feel like as the way I see it, it's just a way to connect me to more people, to make me love more people outside of my immediate blood. And I think that serves me. I don't need an answer while I'm living on the physical planet about it, because every day it helps me act in accordance of a way that I would love to act every day. You know?
Let's try a different example, maybe. Like if I make the claim that guns are good, and I
Okay.
say that it's pragmatic to own a gun because you can defend yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, would you say that's true?
Personally, no. But I don't feel as though there's a need for an argument, because I know what you're saying is true. I know it is pragmatically true that if I had a gun and there was an intruder, chances are, if I know how to use the gun safely, I have a higher chance of surviving. But in my mind, if there's a gun in the house, I have a higher chance of being killed by a firearm just because there's a gun in the house versus not having a gun in the house. So I think that's just because we're looking at it from 2 different paradigms.
Yeah.
That's clearly not the point you were trying to get at. So what were you trying to get at?
Well, I kind of like disagree with you a little bit that I don't think it's enough just to say that it works
Okay.
and just leave it at that.
Okay.
Like, I think you mentioned, like, it has to be rational.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another kind of test. Like, I think that, like, pragmatic truth is one way to get closer to the truth. It's not like we said before, like, the scientific method is not the end all be all. It's in combination with other things that we can find what is true.
Mm-hmm.
So if something is true, it definitely has to work. But not everything that works is true.
Yes, sir!
And now that you've explained it to me, I understand. And
Yeah.
I would agree. Because you're right, not everything that works is true. But I think that not viewing things pragmatically is doing yourself a disservice. I'm not saying only use pragmatic truths. I think that's where we were getting some disconnection.
Yeah.
Because, like, ultimate truth is very important. You're right. Or
Yeah.
the closest approximation to it that we can get. Because if we don't have guidelines for what is true, then we're just going to be lost in our thoughts. Would you agree with that?
Yes. And I think that's why it's important to have this conversation, is to like really flesh out your like ideas about epistemology.
Mm-hmm.
And like that way you can examine like the way that you think about things.
Right. I agree. It's obviously not easy sitting there in retrospect and like reflecting on the way you think and your paradigms and what you choose to be true. But if you never do it, like Kale and I said, you could find yourself falling into dogma and leaning into just whatever it is that looks good. I'm going to run with it, you know?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our society as a whole kind of takes things too literally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just with the kind of scientific right brain view that we have, like analytical, very rational kind of way of thinking.
Yeah.
So when we see crazy stories like the one in Genesis, for example, we look at it and there's no way that can be true. Like, there's no way that like humans fell from heaven and by eating an apple. And I mean, if you look at it like that, then I would agree that like no, like some guy didn't literally eat an apple and like fall from the heavens, but like there's like a message beyond the words on the page. Yeah, one example I was thinking of too, though, I'm reading Lord of the Rings right now, so
Let's go.
that like if you say like, is it true that like Frodo beat Sauron? Yeah, I mean in the story it's true, but like what is in real life that's not literally true. But it's true that good defeats evil.
Exactly.
And that's like what they're trying to convey the message as.
Yeah. I was going to say, I did want to chime in about the Genesis thing. I think it's super important that people aren't, you don't need to look at the Bible as a literal storybook, right? It can be lessons that you take with grains of salt. Because that's the first time, when I read it for the first time, that's how I was looking at it. Because I was one of those people. I was like, this doesn't make sense. My dude turned water to wine. That one dude, Moses, split the Red Sea. Like, obviously, superheroes do these type of things. Fair enough. If I see it on a Marvel property, I agree. But reading that and saying this was a son, a real human being that was walking around doing these miracles, was very tough for me to believe. But then as soon as I go more into it, and I have people explain to me, whether it's on the internet or it's friends, the meaning behind the words, it really is just a big self-help book. right? Like, that's how I see it. You know, obviously there's more to it than that, but he's giving us lessons on how to be the best versions of ourselves, in my opinion, you know?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like reductionist to say it's a self-help book.
And that's fair. I feel like I definitely probably offend a couple people by saying that, and I'm sorry. I don't mean any offense by that.
That's okay. Yeah, the thing about like symbolism that I think is cool is that it kind of an aggregate of all possible situations.
Mm-hmm.
So Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, he talks about archetypes.
Right.
So there's certain like mythological characters and tropes that reoccur.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's because these kind of situations happen in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if each person has a similar experience, they're kind of slightly different,
Right.
but then they're all aggregated into this one symbolic story.
Exactly.
That can be, and that's why like the stories in the Bible have lasted so long, is that they weren't placed in a specific time context.
Mm-hmm.
They were like removed from that into the symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
And like being able to transmit the message that way.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that that's like vital to our success as human beings, is looking for symbolic truth sometimes? Like, we cannot just be rationally thinking all the time.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't know a ton about this, but
Mm-hmm.
as far as I know, there's like the two hemispheres in your brain
Right.
kind of operate differently. So the right side of your brain, like I kind of mentioned before, is more analytical, rational, scientifically minded, whereas the left side of your brain is more involved with creativity and intuition. So I think that our society has kind of gone right brain dominant. And like obviously there is like you need to use both because that's why you have both parts of your brain.
And I think, very big cliche, but very important, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? It stretches everywhere, and people say it in every context because it's true. It's pragmatically true, you know? If you don't use that side of your brain, then you'll find yourself thinking rationally about the next date you're going on. See how well that goes, bro, right? It just doesn't compute, because we are not robots. We are human beings. And we need to look at the world differently because we operate differently. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that you make a really good point that, like, at the end of the day, like, you can come up with reasons and justify why you do what you do or think what you think, but at the end of the day, it's all kind of arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you, like, go far enough and just keep asking why, and you just give some stupid arbitrary reason anyways,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not useful to deny that you do that.
Exactly. Especially because if we're looking for growth, and I feel like that's what we should be striving for every day, like, unless you're telling yourself the truth, how do you expect yourself to be telling other people the truth? And then your relationships aren't going to flourish because people are going to think you're a liar. I don't know. I feel like you need to treat yourself like as the number one, and not in the context that I come before anybody else, because I don't believe that. But I believe that if you treat yourself the same way you would treat your best friend, you don't take everything they say word for word, but you trust them, you know, and you believe them. You have probably a good view of them. You're confident in their abilities. You should be the same about yourself if you are a dynamic thinker who's questioning themselves, because that's all I believe we need, is people who are willing to question themselves and question other people. Because if we don't ask questions, then whatever sounds the best is the truth, you know? And I think that's silly.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say I really appreciate the patience, because we've had a lot of scheduling issues recently. But I'm glad we finally got this episode out to you. I think it's super important that we're thinking about the way we think, that we're talking to our friends about them thinking about the way they think, because the more people that we can connect with this type of stuff, I feel like the further we're going to be in 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it'll start a conversation for some people, or at the very least make people think about it.
Right. And if you have any questions for us, or anything we said just doesn't make sense and seems, especially if it's incorrect, like, let us know, right? We want to have conversations too. We're just here to learn. I really learned a lot preparing for this episode, and it made me happy to see that regardless that I learned about paradigms for the first time in science, it's reflected in everything, and yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Just thanks everybody for listening, I guess.
Exactly. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you when you see it.